on the public domain, and actually you will understand that the immediate media briefing was in the context of what could be in the public space. I will start by introducing the panel, our principals, very quickly so that I allow the minister to read the statement. And as we normally do, upon finishing reading the statement, we'll allow that session for Q&A. I will start from my extreme far right. There's the Minister's Special Advisor, Untate A.D. Mojabudu. He was also part of the last media briefing. I think some of our colleagues can familiarize with the face. Immediately after him, we're having the DDG in the department responsible for universities, Dr. Guy Parker. And then on my immediate right, I'm having the DG of the department, Mr. Grahamstown. I will therefore allow the minister to take us through on the statement, and then on the basis of that, I will open the session for all of you so that we engage with the statement. We will then, after that, liaise with the Cape Town, because we are live in Cape Town. The other media colleagues that side who will therefore engage and therefore conclude. I'm not anticipating that we might go beyond an hour from now, but obviously we'll always be considerate of any questions that might be coming forth, and we will try to be sufficient in terms of responses. I will allow the minister to take us through and then start our media briefing. Thank you very much.
Is this thing? Oh, yes. Thanks very much, Kaye. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for responding to our invitation, which we issued at a relatively short notice this morning. The Department of Higher Education and Training notes the current student protests over fee increases across a number of universities in our public higher education system, and recognizes that university students, like all members of our society, have a right to protest and voice their opinions and grievances. However, in carrying out this right, the department calls on all parties to act with restraint, respect the rights and dignity of others, maintain discipline, and protect university and individual property. This past weekend, we held a highly successful higher education summit that reached common understanding on a number of issues regarding the acceleration of transformation in our universities. These include a common commitment by all the stakeholders to working for an increase in funding allocated to universities, as well as more supportive and expanded student funding models. Further, the Higher Education Summit resolved to explore the possibility of developing regulatory frameworks in the area of fee increments. Now, this is important because it's everybody's commitment on this matter. The summit has indeed laid a firm foundation to systematically deepen transformation and to tackle many of the other more pressing challenges facing the sector. I want to announce that tomorrow I'm convening a meeting with representative delegations of vice chancellors, university council chairs, students and workers to discuss and come up with a common framework and approach to the issue of university fee increases for 2016. An approach must be developed in order to come up with a dispensation that takes into account the difficult circumstances facing especially the students who come from poor families, as well as the financial pressures facing the system. I urge all the stakeholders at institutional level to try and find each other through negotiations first, and for management to take a lead in this regard. I also urge students to give space to these negotiations so that these matters could be resolved amicably. Considering the current economic challenges and fiscal constraints facing the country, the department urges all university councils and management to exercise greater caution and sensitivity in the process of determining fee increases in their institutions. It is imperative that they consult all relevant key stakeholders in order to minimize the detrimental impact on especially poor students. Students need to be brought on board for frank and honest discussions so as to ensure that there is stability in our institutions. The management of universities must open up legitimate channels for discussion and dialogue over these matters and not allow matters to deteriorate, often due to lack of understanding and knowledge of the situation and spurred by poor communication. I may as well add here that we have been urging institutions all along to use what are referred to as institutional fora, which are discussion forums to tackle issues that are important in all of our institutions, so that we do not have to deal with issues only when then there are problems, only when there are boycotts, marches, protests, and so on. That's why our summit, amongst other things, emphasized the necessity for ongoing dialogue in our institutions. We wish to emphasize that. Government remains committed to funding poor students in higher education in the context of a constrained fiscal climate. Funding for poor academically capable students disbursed through the National Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, has increased from 441 million rands in 1997 to over 9.5 billion rands in 2015. While funding has increased considerably, it is clearly still insufficient to support all poor and academically deserving students. Processes for improving the disbursement of funds and concerted efforts to root out fraud and corruption, as well as sourcing additional funding to support students, are currently being explored and implemented. A recent meeting on the 6th of October 2015 between President Jacob Zuma, the Minister of Higher Education and Training, and various other ministers and deputy ministers and representatives from Universities South Africa representing the Vice Chancellors and University Council Chairs Forum discussed key issues facing universities, including student financial aid. The presidential task team that was set up at that meeting is to come up with ways and means of addressing some of the short-term funding problems as we approach the 2016 academic year. As a matter of fact, DG, the task team has laid a foundation for its meetings, for its full meetings in terms of determining what issues may need to be discussed. The task team will report back to the President at the end of November. All higher education stakeholders need to work together given the great strides made and acknowledged at the Higher Education Summit in providing financial support and opening up access to higher education for poor, academically deserving students. The department calls on university management and other stakeholders to engage on these pertinent matters with a view to finding amicable compromises and solutions. Moreover, the department pleads for calm whilst the relevant institutional stakeholders are tackling these issues. All universities would also need to consider cost containment measures so as to arrest the spiraling inefficiencies and contain the inflation within the higher education system. All constituencies within universities must find mechanisms to assist in the maintenance and efficient running of our universities, so that the expansion of the university sector and shortage of funding does not negatively affect the core business of teaching, learning and research, and that an acceptable quality is maintained at all times. Universities must prioritize in accordance with their priority business and the good of the country. The department calls upon the private sector to be more visible than ever before and to contribute and invest in our higher education system. In fact, the private sector is the biggest beneficiary of our higher education system, and investing, maintaining quality in our system and making sure that universities are sustainable is therefore in their own interest. The department calls upon students to give these engagements a chance to provide outcomes that are favorable to the system and to their benefit. As I have said, we also call upon all protest actions to be carried out with dignity and respect and for the laws of this country and the rules of our institutions. I am committed to continue to work with and engage all the stakeholders so as to ensure we resolve all these matters and bring stability to our institutions, especially at this time when end-of-the-year exams are around the corner. Once more, I urge all the parties to give all these matters the urgent attention they require. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was the statement by the Minister. As I indicated before, we are going to therefore allow to open that session for question and answers. We'll start here in the room. We'll take one or two rounds and then we'll check with our Cape Town colleagues in Mbizo. And we should be concluding on the basis of that. Yeah, I can see already there's a hand there. You will identify yourself, the media house you are coming from, for purposes of dependent. I will take you, let me start with you, and you follow the back.
Thank you very much. This is Vowed from Thomson Reuters. Minister, could you please just clarify in rand terms and percentage terms the specific subsidies paid to universities, looking at Wits, Rhodes, UCT and Stellenbosch, how much is paid to them per year and whether these will increase next year? Thank you.
Yes, you can cover it. Thank you very much.
Sipho Stilman from SABC TV News. Two quick questions, Minister. What is your response to criticism that you've actually addressed this issue a little bit late, that, these protests have been happening since last week at the Wits and now they're spreading all over the country and, your voice was missing when all of this started up? And another question is that what can you, because the students are adamant that these increases, they will not accept them. So can you tell them that they won't happen at all? These increases that they're protesting about, like at Rhodes, the MIP costing over 40,000 rands, and then the increase at Wits being over 10%. Can you just give them some sort of a guarantee on tangible action that you're actually going to take and whether these fees won't actually go up at all? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would want to take one hand and then allow the Minister to respond. Can I just end with you for this round?
Famida Mada, Al Jazeera. The department has said that free education is not something that's affordable at the moment. But looking forward, how feasible is free education as a model?
Thank you very much. We will then allow the Minister to respond and then we'll take the second round after that, and the panel.
Okay. See, I want to remind you first that up till this point, the issue of fees is not a matter for the department. It's a matter for the various institutions. That has been the case all along. So it's unfair to then say when there are there's misunderstanding or student protests that I'm the first port of call. I'm not the first port of call. Fees are determined independently by institutions themselves. So I think we need to make the record straight there. When people say I've been absent, I don't agree with that. Because we had a summit for 3 days last week. All these matters were being discussed at a macro level. The issue of fees, that is why the summit, for instance, resolved that we have to look at the possibility of regulatory mechanisms in terms of fees, and therefore the role of our department. But that has not been the case. I feel that sometimes people create a straw man, and then you shoot the straw man down. For the past 5 days, I've actually been dealing almost exclusively with matters relating to universities. Now, this specific issue, which when we discussed it at the summit, we said, because this is an institutional matter, all the stakeholders must go back and discuss this matter, negotiate, and so on. It's amazing because in my closing speech at the summit on Saturday at 12:30, I spoke about this matter. Even my statement is a section which talks about VITs and the implications of it. And I urged that this matter must be discussed with an understanding that poor students must not be put in more difficulties. I said this on Saturday. Now, I don't understand this issue then of being absent. Right now, we realize that possibly we need to contribute towards creating a better climate for institutional negotiations. That is why I'm convening the meeting that I'm convening in Cape Town at 11 tomorrow, to discuss with the representatives of stakeholders on a framework and an approach to the 2016 fee increases. There's a further intervention after we've discussed this in order to create a better climate and also in order to work towards resolving these matters urgently so as not to actually have these matters running into the exams period, which is what I'm very concerned about. Now, how feasible is free education? Also, let me just make this clear, because there seems to be sometimes insufficient attention to detail. It's free education for the poor, academically deserving poor students. It's not for everyone. Those who have got money, they must pay. That is the policy of government. We've never said that it's free education for everybody. So it's now, if you ask how feasible, we've done the figures, we've done the calculations, maybe that there once I finish in terms of what the ministerial task team report, you know, of a team that I had appointed, I think around 2011, 2012, to actually look into what is the meaning of implementing free education for the poor. We even know how much it is. The issue is the resources. It's not that we do not know or that we do not have a plan. We have a plan. We know how much it is. If that money can be in front of us now, we will implement this very soon. So, but the fact that there are no resources does not mean that government, two things I want to say before I shut up. One, does not mean that government is no longer committed to free higher education for the poor, at least until the first, by the way, it's also until the first qualification. It's not for all of higher education. Secondly, to show that sometimes, because we have a problem, when we're in winter, we sometimes behave as if there's never been summer. We have put in a lot of money. In fact, NSFAS is one of the most important achievements of this democratic government. 1.5 million students who have been supported, almost all of whom, most overwhelmingly, have never had a family member seeing the door of a college or a university, let alone graduating. Now, the fact that there are these challenges must not detract from the fact that this NSFAS has done wonders. In fact, it has led and contributed significantly to the growth of the black middle class in this country. I will leave the more details, by the way, because we don't carry figures wherever I go, particularly ministers, they don't do that. But officials, or sometimes if you're lucky. So let's see if you are lucky.
Thank you, Minister. Perhaps just two areas. The one is the issue of the free education for the poor. The ministerial working group modeled what that would mean if we were to consider full cost of study for students, and we were to look at supporting up to 25.5% of the students in the system through full cost of study loans and bursaries. Now, currently, the DHET part of the subsidy that goes to NSFAS covers 16% of students in the system, poor students in the system. If we were to consider that a full cost of study, which currently is an average of 70,000 odd rand per annum, we would be looking at 37 billion required over the MTEF, over the next 3-year period. So that's the order of it. If we were to keep the current average cost of 40,000 per student, we're looking at 17 billion required over the MTEF. In terms of the funding for universities as a whole, the total amount of funding going into higher education, public higher education system is just over 30 billion. And of that, around 20.5 billion, 21 billion goes directly to universities in terms of subsidies in their block grant. The rest is shared between NSFAS, which for universities is 4.1 billion, and the others are earmark grants which focus on supporting universities in particular areas. For example, the clinical training grants, the development of infrastructure, and so on, in order to ensure that our universities are properly supported. This amounts to 12% of the total education budget across the system, and it's about 0.72% of the GDP, of the country's GDP, that is spent on higher education. In terms of specific budgets, a ministerial statement every year comes out, and at that time each university is provided with the specific amounts for their institution, calculated on the size of the university, what their actual inputs are, in other words, their together with a number of other factors, such as an institutional factor, which deals with issues such as the size of the institution. A very small institution needs to be weighted slightly more so it can be sustainable, and institutions that have larger numbers of disadvantaged students will be weighted slightly more. From that perspective, I can tell you that, for example, the University of Cape Town's baseline budget in terms of the block grant this current year was 1.074 billion. University of Education, for example, was 1.148 billion. Stellenbosch University was 1.177 billion, and so on across the system. We've got all the figures for every institution. Depending on the size and shape of that institution, they are funded accordingly in relation to the current formula. Thank you.
Maybe in addition to that, Minister. It's on, Minister. Yeah. The determination of the amount that amounted to 17 billion in respect to what DA is raising was in terms of the 2010 rand value. It's no longer that amount now, it's more if you would calculate from 2010 to date in respect of the rand value. And the other issue, in respect to fee increases, the Minister met with the Vice Chancellors and chairs of councils, and this matter in all these engagements was actually addressed quite deeply. I think it was around February and throughout the year. That led us into working on a study in determining the cost drivers of the fee increases at universities, because we want to come up with scientific pronouncement on the basis of which how these increases are determined at institutional level. Yes.
Also, without appearing to be defensive, sometimes it's very unfair that we sometimes issue a statement or make a communique, it's ignored. And then 6 months down the line, they say, we haven't said anything about this. Or sometimes it was covered, but people sometimes do not go back to actually check that we have been engaging with these issues all the time. Of course, in other instances, we don't have to go to the media. We sit and discuss very extensively with all the stakeholders all the time. For example, I meet with all the stakeholders we had agreed twice a year without fail and discuss these matters outside of the problems and other things, and say what kind of approaches should we be taking, especially on issues relating to funding and financing of higher education.
Thanks, Minister. Let me take another round. I can see there are 2 hands. I'm hoping that these are hands, because after this I'm going.
Are you taking us? I'm going, Chairperson, are you taking us in Cape Town?
Yes, I'm coming to Cape Town. I just want to finish 1 or 2 hands here, then I'm coming down to Cape Town. Okay, I'll just take 1, 2, and then I'll come to Cape Town.
Sure. I hope you can hear me. It's Grahamstown from EMCA. Couple of questions. You mentioned that, well, rather, let me put it this way. What are your sentiments with regards to student fees? I mean, you have mentioned that there is dialogue that you want to start and so forth, but look at discrepancies. For example, some fees, there's some schools where you pay 3,000 rand for an entry fee and others you pay 24,000 rand. What are your sentiments really about student fees generally in South Africa, especially going into this meeting? And just to add on to that, Minister, some varsities are already planning for mass stayaways and boycotts and so forth. What are you saying to them? Should they sit back and watch the process unfold? I know that you have said they do have the right to participate in protests. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. My colleague back there.
All right. Thank you. It's Wisani Mokubele, SABC Radio News. Minister, you say processes are underway to improve the disbursement of funds, and also you're trying to source additional funding, and also efforts to root out corruption. Can you explain briefly on that? And secondly, the fact that the tensions at VET escalated right at the time when you were busy meeting in Durban, what does that tell you?
Thank you very much. Until in Cape Town, can we get an indication if there are hands?
Yes, we do have hands in Cape Town, Chairperson.
Okay.
Chandel, the first one.
Hi, Minister. Chantal Presence from the African News Agency. Do you have an idea of how many of our institutions are affected by these protests over fee increases? And just if you can give me an idea of what those universities are. And also just on the exams, are you expecting this to affect exams, which I think are coming up very soon?
Marianne?
Good afternoon, Minister. Marianne Merton from Independent Newspapers. A couple of clarifications up front, please. When you say that fees have nothing to do with the ministry and the department, on what basis are you then looking at regulation of fees? The second question, clarification, is in your meeting tomorrow with stakeholders, are student organizations included as stakeholders, given not only the events of the past week, but also going forward as part of a community at the new university? If student representative organizations are not part of your meeting tomorrow with stakeholders, what is the reasons for that? While I hear what you're saying in terms of is the university's issues regarding fees, the department and the ministry does have certain obligations within the law and the constitution, and the law that one of the things that came back is early as January this year was a recommendation from the review committee that you appointed to say that changes needed to be made, particularly with the NSFAS threshold, which currently I believe still stands at 120,000 a year. For those students whose parents earn more than that, they're disqualified from NSFAS. So perhaps one of the questions that relates to what's happening at the moment is, why has this recommendation to raise the NSFAS threshold not been implemented? What work has been done to look towards implementing that? Because one of the things, if one listens to public radio and looks at social media for what that is worth, a lot of the students that are outraged at the fee increases are not necessarily poor students, but they are from backgrounds which are essentially lower middle class, where parents are teachers, nurses, clerks, whose combined income takes them over the NSFAS threshold, and therefore they are not eligible for NSFAS support, and yet because of their parents' income, they find themselves in a position where they're basically treated the same as somebody who comes from a super duper 3 million a year plus income household. And surely that is something that the department and the ministry needs to address. Thank you.
Paul?
Good afternoon, Minister. Paul Vecchiata from Bloomberg. First of all, has your department or the universities put together some kind of contingency plan should the exam season not be completed this year? Alternatives in that? Secondly, will you be approaching National Treasury for some kind of increase in budget allocation for NSFS and grants to universities over and above that's what has already been allocated? And then finally, one of the newspapers reported today that you said the students should rather march on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Did you say that, and what did you mean by it, and is this kind of statement helpful at this time? Thank you.
That is all from us in Cape Town, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andile.
Yeah.
Okay, I will come back to you. Can we just, yeah, thanks.
Okay. My sentiment about what the students are raising, I'm very sympathetic to. There is no question about it. You know, because we're a government that is committed to supporting students to actually acquire higher education, even more so in a country like South Africa, given where we come from, and especially also the low participation rate of black students. And we are aware that university education is expensive. And something needs to be done, especially in the developing country. One of the things that, of course, we've done is precisely to use NSFAS as one of the vehicles through which we are able to assist especially poor students. Now, I may as well just add Marianne's question, some of her questions on this. We have asked NSFAS to look into how can we support those students who come from families who do not qualify for NSFAS, but yet are not rich. As you say, the children of the civil servants. A report is on the way, if I'm not mistaken. It's been done. It's on the way to my desk that we actually look into it and what possibilities are they actually raising. Because we have seen as a department that, yes, we must address the issue of expanding NSFAS for beneficiaries, but there are those also who fall outside that, but are not rich to be able to afford university education. But that is why we have started also this process with the vice chancellors, which will include all stakeholders. What are the real cost drivers of higher education? Because as the DG is saying, we have to answer that question, and we've got to know in a scientific way, so as to see whether there are areas where we can make some intervention. But the fact of the matter is that university education is expensive everywhere. More so in capitalist societies like ours. It is very expensive, especially for the poor. That's a fact. So that is something that we actually have to deal with. Now, we're not saying to students they must not protest, but we are saying also, where there are commitments to negotiations and engagement, they must give that process a space. For instance, one of the things we spoke about a bit at the summit is this issue of adversarial relationships in our institutions. We need to find a way of minimizing that. We are not saying there'll be complete agreement, there'll never be protest, but we have to try and stabilize situations and create mechanisms and a climate for dialogue and engagement so that we've got stability in our own institutions. Well, there's lots that we are doing in terms of rooting out corruption in the system. NSFAS, we've just started a process of a forensic investigation because there's lots of anecdotal evidence that there are many people who are getting NSFAS who do not deserve to be getting NSFAS. So we are investigating that, just as one example, to illustrate what is it that we are doing about this matter. Now, Chantel, what was Chantel's? About exams, or the universities. In terms of our information now, the universities that are affected is University of Cape Town, it's Wits University, it's University of Fort Hare, and Rhodes. We have no reports as yet from Stellenbosch, though the media is mentioning it. But we are in touch with all our institutions at the moment. We have a system of being in touch with them on an ongoing basis so that we are able to pick up whatever challenges are there and see what can be done. We really hope that exams won't be affected. In fact, I would like to make a call and a plea as a minister that whatever the issues, let us find a way of dealing with them in a manner that will help us protect our exam system. That students actually write. A country like ours, which has got such a high failure rate at university, we cannot afford that. There is no systemic mechanism that we have placed at the macro level to deal with that. We hope that if that were to happen, the institutions will be able to put mechanisms in place to deal with that. But we must protect the examinations. That is going to be very important, all of us. Now, Marianne, when I say at the moment I do not have powers to determine fees, they are determined by university councils. It does not mean that we cannot explore in future, as the ANC NGC has asked us to do, means of giving the department some powers to have regulations or a regulatory framework on the issue of fees. That is what we are going to explore from now onwards. And the summit also agreed that we must explore that. Well, there are a number of ways through which that could operate. For example, a regulatory framework can say, if any university is going to increase fees by double the inflation rate, or 3-4% above inflation, then it must get concurrence from the minister. That is one way that we can set up a regulatory framework. But as to how it would be, I don't know, because that is something that we've got to deal with. When I say that we do not determine fees, I'm not suggesting by any means that we do not have an interest in that. We do have an interest, because it does affect accessibility, amongst other things, of students. Student access, let me put it that way, to institutions of higher learning. So the fact that we are not doesn't mean that we are disinterested around the nature and fees. Yes, the students will be represented in the meeting that I'm having tomorrow, because there is no way that we can discuss this matter without the student's voice being heard. I am committed that the student voice must be heard as much as possible in many areas as possible. That's why in the summit, amongst other things, students were participating in various panels, but over and above that, they had their own panel at the summit of students talking about their own experiences, their own frustrations, their own aspirations, and all that. In 2010, in the first summit that I had, we took it to heart what that summit resolved, that we need to create student-centered universities. So I'm committed to that, so that students are listened to. And by the way, also as part of making sure that we have a student-centered system, not so long ago I released a draft document on social inclusion in our institutions, so that our students feel part of those institutions. They do not feel marginalized. The fact that we are giving a quite significant amount of money, billions of rands, into student accommodation, is so that we ensure that students are safe and stay and sleep in environments that are conducive to learning. I think, Paul, I've answered you on the issue. Now, the last two questions from Paul. Will I approach Treasury? We approach Treasury every year. Every year we approach Treasury for money. It's an internal government process. Of course, it's not a public process, but we do approach Treasury, so we'll continue approaching Treasury. Now, the issue of the march to the JSE was said tongue-in-cheek in a way, to say, don't only march to me, let's also get business also to play its own role. Because as we say in our statement, business is the single largest beneficiary. So business must come to the party. So that was said tongue-in-cheek, because the students march to me all the time. Why can't they march to the JSE and say, big business, give us money? It's not an incitement or anything like that, as I said. I don't know, DG, if there's anything you want to add or done. Okay.
Thank you very much, Minister. This should be the last hands. I could see that you were itching when we were concluding. You wanted to do follow-ups. Just allow that and then close. And I will assume that also in Cape Town we are fine now. We allowed everybody to speak. Can we
do have a follow-up in Cape Town, Chair? Follow-up question in Cape Town, Chair?
Okay, we'll come back on that specific follow-up. Can I take you and Masaraba at the back?
Minister Mareka from Jacaranda FM and Kagiso, you've partially answered this question, but we're looking at social media now, for example, in the whole day, and a big thing amongst the students seemed to be that they feel that they're not being heard. You said that they were involved in the summit to an extent, and they will be in the meeting tomorrow, but to what extent? Do you have any plans to go to some of the universities maybe and address these students? Because if you're looking at the comments, especially now from WITS in the last 5 or 10 minutes, students are furious because they feel that the universities aren't listening to them, nothing is coming from above. Do you have any plans regarding that?
Thank you. Yes.
Was it for me? It was
yeah, fine.
It was the same question, really.
Okay.
My question was more direct. Why have you not been to any of the universities, Minister? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Andela, in Cape Town.
Hi, sorry, it's Marianne. Just a quick follow-up. In terms of the report that the Minister says is making its way to his desk, that arises out of recommendations in January. It is now October. I remember that your DG that in October we'll also have the report back on levels of abuse. And trying to find out whether it takes 10 months on something that is quite important to higher education, because what we're seeing at WITS and UCT now is quite different, but it comes after years and years of very similar protests happening every year. If it still takes 10 months for something to be processed, surely what is happening now at WITS, at UCT, at Fort Hare, at Rhodes, surely it must inspire a much greater sense of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. This was the last hand. Can then allow the panel to respond on that, and then we should be closing after that. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll leave you to the DG. I'm not sure if I understand, Marianne, what is talking about a report that's going to take 10 months. Is that about the forensic
investigation? If I may clarify.
Yes.
Sorry, the forensic investigation, I believe you told the Parliamentary Education Committee about in February. Subsequent to that, there was a media briefing in May to say that it will be launched. At that briefing, your DG was on record that the investigation into fraud, corruption and other mishandlings at NSFAS would be available in October. I hope that clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll give that to the DG. I visit universities all the time. I don't understand people say, when am I visiting universities? I visit universities all the time, and colleges. And whenever I visit an institution, by the way, I make sure that I meet with all the stakeholders. I meet with the SRC. I meet with worker representatives, in many instances now, that is the sole organizer in some of these institutions. I meet with academics, and I meet with management as well as councils, so that when I leave the institution, I've got a fairly good idea of what are the issues and what are the concerns. So it's something that I do all the time, and which I'm going to continue to do. So it can't be that the question can be, when will you be at the universities? When I visit the universities all the time. We invite the media, by the way. In all our visits, we invite the media to say, come and be with us. Often, sometimes, not often, most of the time, we also end up addressing a university assembly of everybody, having met the stakeholders, then we address the university assembly. Now, you know, when I was closing the summit, I raised this matter specifically. I said, going forward, I would really like to further engage with the students to fully understand what we mean by saying they are not being heard. Is it because there are no platforms for them to engage in institutions? And I want to engage seriously with the students on that matter as to what form does that take as far as they are concerned. Is it because they have no platforms to speak, or is it because even if they have platforms, the issues that they are raising are not being attended to? Because the two things are not exactly the same. So I am concerned about that statement. I said it to the students that I'm concerned that if you say we are not being heard, then that's a problem. We must actually continue to engage with them and then see what is it that needs to be done so that the student voices are heard, because no voice must be suppressed, especially student voices. DG, would you like to deal with the NSFAS forensic process?
No, thanks, Minister. No, in respect to this matter, a service provider has been appointed and they've started doing the work. Now, as to when are they going to finish, they will indicate to us. But they are looking at doing thorough work. So one of the things that we had to do upon the appointment of the service provider to undertake this exercise, we had to negotiate with the institutions, because we don't have a right to just go and investigate them, because they are autonomous institutions. So we're to engage and agree with the processes together with NSFAS, and that has been done, and the investigation is going ahead now. What is good about it, we got an assurance of the cooperation by all institutions in respect to the investigation itself as it is currently taking place. And as a department, we can't interfere with that process now. It has to go and run its course, and they finish and bring a report to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, DG. You put him in trouble. I will have to close now because of time.
Just one quick question. Just to the Minister, what is your response to student protesters who say this is a national crisis?
Can you come again just to elaborate that question?
Students are calling the fee situation a national crisis. Does the Minister agree with that?
I don't want to appear as if I do not appreciate the seriousness of this matter, but to call it a crisis, then it's subjected to all sorts of different tests that we've got to put it into in order to say that there is a crisis. The reason why I'm saying that is because, first of all, I've been assured at the summit by all the vice chancellors who were there that they are willing to engage on this matter, and they are willing to listen to the students. That's why, amongst other things, Professor Habib left the summit to go and engage. Now, a crisis situation sometimes implies that there are no mechanisms. The situation is so bad that there are no mechanisms to actually deal with this. There are mechanisms to deal with this. I'm meeting with the stakeholders tomorrow so that we can adopt a framework and an approach to this particular question. And we are urging everybody to actually cooperate, both management and students and workers and other stakeholders. Yes, it's a challenge, but I wouldn't call it a crisis, because we do have ways and means of discussing the matter. And I'm hopeful that through thorough discussion and negotiations and compromises, common solutions can actually be found.
Thank you very much. I must thank all of you colleagues for the attendance, and as usual, we expect that you are going to report quite positively on this media brief, on the content of what the minister presented. Next time, now also. Thank you very much. And the chancellor.
Well, you're watching News Today. That was a live crossing to a media briefing by Higher Education Minister Blade Nzimande on the student fee increment protests that are spilling over from Wits University to other parts of the country now. We were just catching the tail end of that media briefing there. The Minister has just finished fielding questions from the media contingent. Now he's...
We need to get the Zulu there as well.
Regulatory framework or discussion around that is most definitely on the cards. The Minister reiterating that student engagement and heightened consultation with tertiary learners is indeed paramount to any viable solution at this point. A push also from the Minister for big business in South Africa to get more involved and come up with a more cohesive solution to this problem. NSFAS did allocate 9.5 billion rand in bursaries and loans for this year. That is up from 2014's 8.3 billion rand. Most definitely the will is there. It is government's most successful schemes to aid students from poor, disadvantaged families who show academic ability. Well, we'll be bringing you up to speed on those student protests throughout the afternoon, so do stay tuned to SABC News. On that note, let's take a short break. We'll be right back.